Why you feel like a different person with different people. Carl Jung observed that the face you wear at your mother's table is not quite the face you wear with your oldest friend, and neither of those is quite the face waiting for you at your desk on Monday morning. And here is the premise, spoken plainly, before anything else. Goethe wrote in Faust, a book Jung returned to again and again across his life. Two souls, alas, dwell within my breast. And Jung would stop you right there and say, do you see it? He was not describing a disorder. He was describing the ordinary architecture of the human psyche. Most of us assume that having one steady, unchanging self is health, and that shifting according to company is some kind of failure, some kind of quiet dishonesty we are getting away with. But the very opposite turns out to be true. The psyche was never built to show one face to a world made of many rooms, and the discomfort you feel noticing your own changeability is not a symptom, it is the beginning of seeing clearly. So let me bring this home before we go further. I notice today which face I put on before I have even reached the front door. I notice how easily I become someone slightly different for my mother than for my closest friend. And I stop pretending that noticing this is betrayal. It is simply honesty. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. And again, I make the unconscious conscious. And if this kind of honest looking is useful to you, consider staying close by subscribing, so that tomorrow's teaching finds you the way this one did. Before we go further, type the two words "face it" in the comments below. Just those two words. Let it be a small private seal on what you already know is true about yourself. The first key is this. The different faces you show are not lies. They are masks, and the mask, Jung taught, has a name and a function. He called it the persona, borrowing the word from the masks worn by actors on the Roman stage, where the actor's true voice came through an opening in the mask, so that the word itself originally meant sounding through. And there is something worth pausing on in that image alone. The mask was never meant to replace the voice, only to give the voice a shape the audience could receive, and Jung wrote of this plainly. The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. Notice the precision of that sentence. He did not say the persona is a lie you tell. He said it is a garment negotiated between you and the world, a garment cut to fit the particular room you are standing in. You do not wear the same coat to a funeral and to a summer wedding, and no one calls that hypocrisy. They call it appropriateness. So why do we flinch when the same logic applies to the self? Imagine a woman on an ordinary Thursday. At 9 in the morning, she is on a call with a client. Her voice measured, her sentences tidy, every trace of worry smoothed out of it. And at noon her mother phones, and within one sentence her voice has changed entirely. Softer, quicker, a little more patient than the client ever heard. And at 7 that evening, a friend she has known since school arrives at her door, and a third voice appears, looser, quicker to laugh, willing to be teased in ways neither the client nor the mother would recognize. Now ask yourself honestly, which of these three voices was the fake one? And if you sit with the question, you find there is no honest answer, because none of them was fake, and none of them was the whole of her either. Each was simply the correct garment for that particular room, worn without dishonesty. The persona is not a betrayal of the true self. It is one of the true self's necessary instruments. Without it, Jung warned, civilization itself becomes impossible, because raw, unmediated psyche, spilling out unfiltered in every room, every irritation, every private grief, every half-formed thought, would be unbearable to be around, and unbearable to be. Think of how exhausting a world would be where the client heard your grief, and your mother heard your business voice, and your oldest friend received only politeness. The mask is not concealment in that sense, it is translation. So the first thing to release tonight is the guilt, the quiet suspicion that feeling different around different people means you are somehow fake, or performing, or getting away with something. You are not fake. You are dressed correctly for the weather you are standing in. And this is worth restating slowly, because the guilt is sticky, and it returns. You are not two-faced for having a work voice and a home voice. You are simply human, built the way every human psyche is built, to meet many rooms with many appropriate faces, and the real question, the one worth sitting with tonight, is not why do I change? Every healthy person changes. The real question is whether you still remember, underneath the garment, who is doing the wearing, whether you can still feel the voice sounding through the mask, or whether the mask has begun to feel like the only voice you have. I wear the mask, and I do not confuse it for my face. But the second key is this. Even Jung himself lived this exact experience, and he wrote about it with striking honesty in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. He described having, as a boy, what he called personality number 1 and personality number 2. Number 1 was the schoolboy, dutiful, a little uncertain, doing his sums, worrying about grades, trying to fit into the social world of Basel as it expected him to fit. Number 2 was older somehow, quieter, closer to the centuries, a figure who felt at home among old stones and old books and the slow certainties of nature, who found the modern world of school report cards faintly absurd. And this was not a passing mood he could shrug off. He described it as two genuinely different currents running through the same boy, each with its own memory, its own tone of voice, its own sense of what mattered. And for years this troubled him deeply. He wondered, with real anxiety, which one was the true Carl Jung, and which one was the imposter wearing his name. Notice that this is precisely the question so many of us quietly carry, lying awake, wondering which version at the dinner table tonight was the real me and which was the performance. Jung eventually understood that this was the wrong question from the start. Both were real, both belonged fully to him, and the task set before him was never to crown one and banish the other. The task was to hold them, consciously, side by side, without allowing either one to seize the wheel unsupervised and drive the whole of his life while the other slept. Now let me bring this closer to your own evenings. Imagine a woman, and this is the shape of a story rather than a record. Imagine her at her sister's house on a Sunday afternoon, quick with old family jokes, slightly childish in the way only siblings can make each other childish, competitive over nothing, warm underneath it. And imagine that same woman 3 hours later, sitting across from the college friend she has kept for 20 years, and something in her drops half an octave, becomes slower, more philosophical, willing to sit in silence without filling it. These are not two disguises laid over some hidden true woman waiting underneath. They are two honest currents, and Jung would ask her the same question he eventually learned to ask himself. Not which one are you pretending to be, but can you feel both of them as equally your own, without needing to choose, without needing to declare one the imposter, just because it surprises you? This is the quiet relief, hidden inside the second key. You are not obligated to resolve Goethe's two souls into one tidy soul before you are allowed to feel at peace. Jung did not resolve his either. He simply learned, slowly, to let number 1 and number 2 coexist under one watchful roof, each given its own room, neither one locked out of the house entirely. I carry more than one face, and I do not shame myself for the wardrobe. The third key is where the real danger begins, and it is not the danger people expect. The danger is never that you have a persona. The danger is that you forget you are wearing one. Jung called this identification, and he described it happening constantly and quietly, most often to people who are, by every outward measure, doing extremely well. He wrote of it directly. A man can strive to attain an artificial personality without punishment, meaning the world will not stop you. The world will in fact reward you handsomely for becoming nothing but your job title, your role, your reputation. He gave the example of the professor who so completely identifies with his position that he becomes, in his own mind, and eventually, in fact, the textbook he authored. He is no longer a man who teaches a subject. He has become the subject. And something quietly goes missing when that happens, because a human being is always larger than any single role, and whatever does not fit inside the professor's textbook, whatever is playful, or uncertain, or ordinary, or foolish, does not disappear. It simply gets pushed backstage, into what Jung called the shadow, the less lived and less acknowledged portion of the self. So understand the distinction carefully here, because it matters. The persona is what you knowingly put on for a given room. The shadow is what you have refused to look at all. Wearing a mask is not the problem. Mistaking the mask for your whole face is the problem. And notice how quietly this happens. There is rarely a single dramatic moment where a person decides to become their role. Instead, it happens the way a groove wears into a stair, one small, comfortable step at a time. The professor is praised for his precision, so he offers precision more often. The reliable one is thanked for never breaking down, so she learns to stop mentioning when she is close to breaking. Each reward tightens the garment by another thread, until one day the garment and the skin beneath it can no longer be told apart, even by the person wearing it. And here is the thing worth sitting with. An actor who has played the same role for years on end can sometimes forget, walking home after the curtain falls, which lines were the character's and which were his own. The costume comes off, but something in the posture stays on, the way of standing, the way of answering a question before it is even finished. This is identification exactly, not a costume worn for an evening, but a costume the body has quietly agreed never to remove again. Imagine a mother, and this is not a case Jung recorded, but the shape of a story that fits exactly what he described. Imagine a woman who raised 3 children while also managing a household on very little help, and somewhere in those years she became, to everyone around her, the one who copes, the one who never falls apart, the one whose voice on the phone always says everything is fine before anyone has even finished asking. And it served her. It earned her a certain quiet respect. Neighbors admired her. Her own mother leaned on her. Her children grew up believing distress simply was not a language she spoke. And then one ordinary afternoon, alone in her kitchen with the radio on and nothing urgent required of her, she found she did not know what to do with a wave of grief that had no crisis attached to it, no one to be strong for, no emergency to manage, and she sat with the strange discovery that she had no practiced way of simply being upset for its own sake, because the garment she had worn for 20 years had never once been designed to hold that. It had been built entirely for coping, and coping, worn long enough without ever being questioned, had quietly become mistaken for her whole nature. And this is the second angle worth turning here. Identification rarely announces itself as suffering at first. It arrives disguised as competence, as being needed, as being praised, which is exactly why it slips past unnoticed for so long. Shame invites resistance, but praise invites only more performance of the very thing being praised. So the garment thickens year by year, with nothing pushing back against it. It is not that the persona is evil. It is that a persona worn long enough without being questioned begins to feel like the entire person, and everything that does not fit gets quietly starved of light and air, until it either goes silent for good or returns, uninvited. Exactly when there is no longer a role left to hide behind. I wear my role, but I do not let my role wear me. The fourth key is where we make this undeniable. So pause for a moment and walk one ordinary day of your own life with me. Honestly, the way you actually live it, not the way you would describe it to a stranger. 6:40 in the morning, you speak to your partner or your children in a voice that is soft in certain grooves, worn smooth by years. That is one garment. 7:15, you are in the car or on the train. Your face goes neutral, guarded, faceless among strangers. That is a second garment. 9 o'clock, you walk into work and something in your spine straightens. Your vocabulary sharpens. You become the version of you that has a title. That is a third garment. 12:30, lunch with colleagues, slightly looser than the 9 o'clock self. Jokes are permitted now, but never the wrong jokes. That is a fourth garment. 3 o'clock, a call from an old friend, and within 4 sentences, your voice has dropped an octave of formality. Old references surface. A person from 15 years ago briefly reappears. That is a fifth garment. 6 o'clock, home again, and depending on who is at the table, parent, partner, roommate, a sixth garment. And then, if you are fortunate, 10:30, alone, lights low, no persona required at all, and something in the chest finally exhales. Count them. 6 or 7 distinct versions of yourself in a single unremarkable Tuesday, and none of them fraudulent. And here is the part worth sitting with a little longer, because the wall itself deserves study. Before we move past it, picture it plainly: a wall of small hooks in a dim room, and on each hook, a garment waiting. The client voice hangs there quiet until 9. The parent voice waits folded until 6. The old friend voice hangs loosest of all, rarely needed, but always kept ready. And notice something curious about this wall. Most of us can name every hook without hesitation. We know exactly which garment we reach for at each hour. The trouble is never in the knowing. The trouble is in the reaching, because reaching implies a hand doing the choosing. And so much of the average day happens instead on a kind of rail. One hook triggering the next automatically. The coffee cup down, the car door open, the office door open, each cue pulling the next garment onto you, before any real choice occurs. Imagine a man who works in a role requiring constant patience with difficult customers. All day he absorbs complaint after complaint without flinching, softening his voice, agreeing more than he means to agree. And he comes home at 6, and his own child asks him an ordinary question 3 times in a row, and the patience that felt so effortless at work is nowhere to be found. And he snaps, and stands there afterward genuinely startled by himself, wondering where that sharpness came from. And the honest answer is that the office garment never came off. It simply kept working past its hour. Worn into a room it was never cut for. This is the ordinary mismatch Jung was pointing toward. Not villainy, only a garment outliving its room. Ask yourself honestly, out of all 6 or 7 garments in your own Tuesday, how many did you choose consciously, feeling the weight of them as you put them on? And how many simply happened to you, arriving out of habit, because that particular hook has been reached for so many thousand times that the hand no longer waits for permission? This is the diagnostic worth sitting with tonight. Not, are you changeable? Everyone is changeable. Every healthy person moves through many garments in a single day. But are you the one selecting the garment, feeling the weight and the fit of it before you put it on? Or has the garment, through long, unexamined habit, begun selecting you, reaching for itself, wearing you rather than the reverse? Try this quietly before you sleep tonight. Walk back through your own day exactly as we have walked through this one, hour by hour, and at each hook, ask simply, did I choose this, or did it simply happen? You are not looking for a verdict, only for the beginning of a habit of noticing, because noticing, however small, is where the choosing hand begins to wake up again. I notice which face is required, before I let it take over unquestioned. And if something in that Tuesday walkthrough felt uncomfortably familiar, stay close. Subscribe now, so tomorrow's teaching arrives before the pattern repeats itself again. The 5th key is the deepest one, and it unfolds in several movements, so let me take them slowly, one at a time, because this is where the different person feeling stops being merely interesting and starts being genuinely instructive. First, consider the accounting. Every persona you wear, however necessary, however well fitted to its room, leaves something out. The professional self at 9 o'clock has no room for grief. The parental self at 6 o'clock has no room for exhaustion. The reliable self at any hour has no room for doubt. And whatever gets left out of a persona does not simply vanish into the air. It goes somewhere. Jung's whole model of the shadow depends on this exact mechanism. The parts of you that do not fit the current garment are quietly filed away, unlived, and the brighter and more polished a given persona becomes, the denser and more crowded that backstage area grows. This is the first thing worth sitting with tonight. The different person feeling is not only about adapting outward to different rooms, it is also, invisibly, a running tally of everything each room has quietly required you to leave behind. And the tally does not disappear simply because you never look at it. It waits, the way an unopened envelope waits on a table. Second, consider what happens when the garments multiply without any true home to return to. This is subtler than the collapse we already spoke of. This is a quieter erosion, familiar to anyone who has ever finished a long day of shifting from room to room, meeting to meeting, voice to voice, and arrived home feeling strangely hollow. not tired in the muscles, tired somewhere further in. This is not psychosis, and it is not multiple personalities in the clinical sense. Jung was careful never to describe healthy persona shifting as any kind of fracture, but he did notice, and wrote of, a particular fatigue that comes from wearing too many masks with too little space kept between them. A fatigue that is really the cost of identification spread thin across many rooms at once, instead of concentrated in one. Think of it as a coat rack with too many coats and not enough hooks, each garment leaning on the next. None of them quite hung properly, and the whole rack beginning, by evening, to feel unsteady. Third, let me walk you through a fuller version of this, because the pattern is easiest to see across a whole stretch of ordinary time rather than a single moment. Imagine, and this is not a case Jung recorded, but the shape of a story that fits exactly what he described. Imagine a woman known among her friends and her family as the calm one, the fixer, the one you call at midnight when the crisis lands. In her 20s, this cost her almost nothing. It felt like a gift she was glad to give. By her 30s, it had become expectation. No one asked anymore whether she had the capacity. They simply assumed it, the way you assume a lamp will turn on when you flip the switch. By her 40s, she had grown so skilled at this particular garment that she could put it on without even feeling the weight of it. A friend calls in tears, and before the friend has finished the first sentence, her voice has already dropped into its practiced register, soft, unhurried, endlessly available, and she is good at it, genuinely good. She softens rooms. She solves things. And one ordinary evening, alone, no crisis to attend to, no one calling, she sits down and feels an odd blankness where her own needs should be. She cannot easily say what she wants for dinner. She cannot easily say what is wrong, because the garment she has worn into every room for 20 years has no pocket sewn in for her own trouble. It was cut only to receive other people's, and so her own has been quietly filed backstage for 2 decades, not banished by cruelty, simply crowded out by usefulness. Notice how ordinary this looks from the outside. No one would call her life a crisis. Her friends would call her lucky to have someone so steady. And that is precisely what makes this kind of cost so easy to miss. It does not announce itself with a collapse, the way identification with a job title sometimes does. It simply accumulates, quietly, one midnight phone call at a time, until the accounting comes due in the strange blank hour when no one is calling and she has to sit with herself and finds there is less there than she expected. Fourth, and here is the turn worth sitting with longest. This is precisely where individuation begins, not in choosing one true persona and discarding the rest. That is neither possible nor healthy. The fixer does still need to be steady for her friends sometimes. The parent does still need to soften their voice. Individuation does not mean abandoning the garments. And it does not mean refusing to wear any mask at all, which would make ordinary life among other people unworkable. Individuation begins the moment you can stand slightly apart from every garment you own and ask, calmly, without alarm, who exactly is doing all this wearing? Fifth, notice how this reframes the very discomfort you came here with tonight. You arrived perhaps a little uneasy about feeling like a different person in different rooms, wondering if it meant something was wrong with you, and the truth running underneath everything Jung taught is gentler than that fear. The unease itself is not a malfunction, it is the watcher in you, beginning to notice the garments as garments. Most people never reach even that much. They simply become each mask in turn, and forget there was ever a chooser underneath. So the very discomfort that brought you to this video is already a kind of consciousness stirring. Sixth, try a small version of this yourself tonight, through what might be called a mask census. Take one real relationship in your life, just one, a colleague, a parent, a partner, an old friend, and ask honestly what you allow yourself to be in their presence, and just as importantly, what you quietly do not allow. Notice exactly where the garment ends, and something unexpressed begins waiting just behind it. Do this again tomorrow with a second relationship, and again the day after with a third. Not to catalogue every version of yourself at once, but to build, slowly, the habit of noticing the seam where the garment meets the skin. This is not an exercise designed to make you discard the persona. Remember, the persona is necessary. It is an exercise designed only to introduce you to the part of you that has been doing the choosing all along, usually without much supervision, because here is the correction worth holding carefully. The persona is not the shadow. The persona is what you consciously present. The shadow is what you have never looked at all. And confusing the two is exactly how identification happens. A man who thinks his professional mask is his entire self is not seeing his persona clearly. He has simply stopped seeing that it is a persona at all. And a woman who thinks her steadiness is her whole nature is not seeing hers clearly either. She has only stopped noticing there was ever a choice in it. The goal, then, quietly stated, across a whole lifetime, is never to arrive at one final unchanging face for every room. It is to keep a small, steady, watching center that knows, in every room, this is the garment I have put on today, and this is still not the whole of who I am. I hold many faces, and none of them holds me. I hold many faces, and sixth key is the quiet one, the one meant to send you home lighter rather than more burdened, and it is simply this. The fact that you feel like a different person with different people was never the problem to be solved. It was only ever a signal, correctly read, pointing you back toward the one steady watcher underneath all of it. Jung never asked his patients to flatten themselves into a single unchanging performance for every room they entered. That would be its own kind of imprisonment. No truer than the identification we already named as the danger. He asked them only to remain quietly awake, inside whichever garment the room required, so that the garment served them, rather than the other way around. And consider how this actually looks in an ordinary life. Imagine a man who spends Saturday morning at his daughter's kitchen table, patient with her toddler's endless questions, his voice slow and warm and a little silly, the kind of voice he would never use anywhere else, and by early afternoon he is standing at his own mother's door, and something in him quietly rearranges itself. He becomes the dutiful son again, careful with his words, a little more formal than he means to be, still catching himself listening for her approval, the way he did at 9 years old. And then that same evening, he sits across a table from the friend he has known since university, and the dutiful son disappears entirely, replaced by someone quicker to argue, quicker to laugh at his own mistakes, entirely unguarded. 3 rooms in a single day, 3 faces, and not one of them was false. The trouble would only come if he carried the toddler's silliness into the negotiation with his mother's old expectations, or brought the guarded son into his daughter's kitchen where none of that guardedness was ever needed. That mismatch, not the changing itself, is what actually wounds a life. So notice tonight, gently, without alarm, which garment you are currently wearing, and ask honestly whether it fits the room you are standing in, or whether it is simply left over from a room you stood in hours earlier. Think again of your own Tuesday, 6 or 7 faces moving through 6 or 7 rooms, and know now that none of that variety was ever dishonesty. Variety is simply what it looks like to be a full human being, moving through a full human life. One voice for the phone, another for the kitchen table, another still for the empty car at a red light, and the only real question, the one you get to carry gently with you now, is not whether you change, everyone changes, but whether you remain the one choosing the mask, awake enough to notice the choosing, or whether some old mask, worn too long without question, has quietly begun choosing you instead. So tonight, when you notice yourself shift, softening for one person, sharpening for another, here is the whole picture. The persona is a garment, not a lie, and every room deserves the right garment. Even Jung himself lived as more than one self, and neither of his selves was the false one. Identification is the true danger, when the garment is mistaken for the face beneath it. An ordinary Tuesday reveals 6 or 7 honest changes of clothing, and asks only who is choosing them. The shadow grows dense wherever the persona leaves something behind unworn, and individuation begins the moment you can watch yourself dressing without being fooled by the mirror. And none of these 6 keys were ever separate teachings. They were 6 turns of the very same key. The recognition that you were never meant to be one flat, unchanging face for every room in your life. You were meant to be a steady presence, wearing many appropriate faces, wide awake underneath every one of them. So carry this gently. The different person you become with different people was never evidence against you. It was only ever the many rooms of an honest life, asking to be met appropriately. And the true question, held quietly from now on, is not which face is the real one, but whether you are still there, awake, underneath whichever face the day has asked of you. I make the unconscious conscious, and I ask you now, gently, and let it stay open. Which face are you wearing in this very room, right now, and do you still remember who put it